Hey everybody, it's April in Pennsylvania. Woke up this Good Friday morning to snow. How about it? So, Good Friday, what is it? Why is it good? Some of us have no clue, but we're going to talk about that. For those of us that do, as Christians, why do we celebrate it? What's it mean? We're going to talk about that in a second, but I want to introduce you real quick to my family. Day in the life of the McAvoy home, which is totally disrupted from all of our house projects. Here's Eli, my youngest, my baby, and he is getting some leftover pizza ready to warm up.
He's cooking us lunch.
Look at him cooking lunch. How about that? All right. So here's the deal. Good Friday. I like to make Good Friday feel real, and because a lot of times it can become a story. There is my ceiling we're working on right now. So a lot of times it can feel very disconnected from reality. It can feel like it's just this story that maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but it did. It's a true story about a real person named Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And that real person, he was arrested, falsely accused. He was tried by a joke of a court and found innocent by the authority, but handed over to a death sentence after being brutally tortured and then killed in a gruesome death upon a cross in front of thousands and thousands of witnesses. Now, that statement is a summation of the story, and again, it can feel very disconnected. So I grew up listening to my parents and their generation have these conversations like, I remember when. I remember where I was when this happened. I remember where I was when that happened. And so they would talk about remembering where they were when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, or his brother Bobby Kennedy, or Martin Luther King Jr. And, they remember these different things in their day and time. Well, and I grew up, I remember when Ronald Reagan, the attempted assassination was. I remember when the first Gulf War broke out with President George W. Bush. No, George H. Bush. I remember where we were for New Year's Eve on Y2K. And of course, I remember where I was on 9/11, right? So we all have these memories of where we were when these specific events happened. So I just want to make a real-time type experience for you on this Good Friday. So where were you yesterday evening? What were you doing? Because about 2,000 years ago, that's when Jesus was having a meal in an upper room with his closest followers, his disciples. And during that meal was where he introduced the tradition of communion, where we take bread and drink and remember his broken body and his shed blood for our new relationship with God that was established by his sacrifice. And notice he did that in a very prophetic, foretelling kind of way. Like it didn't happen yet, but he's saying, hey, it's going to happen and I want you to remember. It was at that meal that Judas ended up getting up and leaving and going off to betray him and sell him out to the Jewish religious leaders. And then last night, as you were getting ready to go to bed, as you were putting your head on the pillow, Jesus had made his way out of the city of Jerusalem with his followers, and he went up to this garden on a hill called the Mount of Olives, and the Garden of Gethsemane. He started to pray. And while you were laying your head on a pillow, he was, most people think leaning against a rock or a tree, and was praying to God the Father, saying, if there's some way, please let this cup pass from me. But yet, not my will, but your will be done. So about the time that you were falling into a deep sleep, Judas showed up with these religious guards, these guards of the temple. And so it was like the police, right? And they showed up and arrested Jesus and then drug him from the Mount of Olives back into Jerusalem to the household of the high priest, where through the night he was questioned. And then at around 3 a.m, he got drug away from there and ended up going off between 3 and 6 a.m., somewhere in there. He went back and forth from the house of the high priest to Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman governor at the time. And then he got dragged over back to the religious folks. And then he went to King Herod, and then he goes back to Pilate, where all of this happened this morning. So when you were waking up, Jesus had already spent all night long being tried and then drug over to Pilate, drug over around 6 in the morning to Herod, and then drug back over to Pilate, where then, as you were eating breakfast, Jesus was being whipped and beaten. And then as you probably got up from your breakfast table, around 7, 8 in the morning, Jesus ended up having to be carrying his cross out of the city of Jerusalem to the place of the skull, known as the Hill of Golgotha. There, at around 9 a.m. this morning, what were you doing? Where were you at 9 a.m. this morning? What were you doing? Because Jesus at that time was having his arms stretched open wide against his fleshly desire, and having nails pierced through his hands and through his feet or ankles into 2 wooden beams where he was raised up on a cross and hung. Where were you around between 9 and noon as Jesus was hanging there and being mocked and spit at, and people, even the 2 thieves that were beside him, making fun of him and saying, hey, get off that cross and save us too? And then where were you around noon today? Maybe sitting down for lunch? Because that's about when darkness came over the land. And the Roman guards were watching. They'd already been rolling their dice to figure out who was going to get Jesus's seamless cloak and then robe. And then after 12 o'clock, so it goes dark over the land. And then between 12 and 3, there's some different things that happen. They try to give Jesus some vinegar to drink, and vinegar wine, and there's some other things. But eventually at 3 o'clock, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then he says, it is finished. And he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then he breathes his last breath saying, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. And at that point, 3 in the afternoon, approximately, Jesus dies. So I don't know when you're watching this and if that's happened yet. It hasn't happened here yet. But around 3 p.m., Jesus took his last breath. And then between 3 and 6, Joseph of Arimathea, so about the time you are getting dinner, Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pontius Pilate, and he gets permission to take the body of Jesus and bury him. So an earthquake happened around 3 that got everybody's attention. And then Joseph gets permission to take Jesus's body and bury it. So between 3 and 6 p.m., they are taking Jesus down off the cross. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea take Jesus's body. They kind of wrap it up in burial cloths and put some spice oils type stuff on it. They put him in a tomb that was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and they bury him. And so by 6 p.m. tonight, after you're done eating dinner or around dinner time, Jesus is dead, and he's lying in a tomb with the tomb sealed, shut by a big massive stone. And Saturday morning when you wake up, the religious leaders will have gone to Pilate and said, listen, this guy declared that he was going to rise from the grave on the 3rd day. So that would be worse than all of his teachings combined. So it's important that you set guards at that tomb. So tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, that's exactly what Pilate did. He sent some guards with the religious leaders. They put a Roman seal on the tomb so that anybody who broke it was in violation of Roman law and worthy of death. And these guards stood guard all day Saturday night until Sunday morning, where, you guessed it, Easter happens, right? The resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we'll talk more about that later. So in real time, where are you when? Where were you this morning when Jesus was making his way out of Jerusalem, carrying his cross to Golgotha? Where were you this morning at 9? Where were you today at noon? Where were you at 3 in the afternoon? Or where will you be? Where were you this in the evening when Jesus' body was laid in the grave? Think about it. a real person going through a real life situation that has great relevance for us today. And the danger is that it just becomes a story that fades into history, one that can be questioned on its truthfulness and accuracy, one that causes people to just think that's a nice story, but did it really happen? It did. And these, all of these events that I just mentioned to you happened in front of thousands of people at different points, and then some smaller groups along the way. But just want to encourage you on this Good Friday, let it happen in real time and just walk through the journey. Where were you when Jesus did these things? Have an awesome day, a happy Good Friday, happy Easter, and I'll chat with you more later. God bless.